Right. So yeah, that's kind of what I do with the balls. Anyway, we're live. Hey,
what's up,
everybody? Okay. Welcome everyone to Professional Novice with Ali Rizvi. My name is Ali Rizvi, and we're back after quite a while, but this is a very good reason to be back. And I'm here with my good friend who you've seen many times, political strategist. He's a political strategist today, actually, Michael Spitz, and then also my good friend Jay Shapiro, filmmaker. And both of us, well, all three of us are here to talk about the future of an increasingly fragmented America. So what's happened is the Supreme Court recently has, just issued some landmark rulings. I mean, they overturned Roe v. Wade, which we all know about. Also, some issues with like gun control laws, with voting rights. So liberals are kind of freaking out at the moment, and these conservatives are kind of jonesing for states' rights. They're saying it's all in the name of states' rights. That's kind of controversial, but that's what we're going to talk about. And liberals, in my opinion, I don't think they really know what to do with themselves because I don't think they know what they're doing. I don't know. I think they know how to respond. So the question here is
well, partly the liberals are to blame if we can. Going back to 2016, Hillary's emails, right?
Yeah,
Hillary wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah, we'll get that. I mean, the way that I put it in the description is they continue to cannibalize themselves with the best of intentions. That's the whole idea. So the question is there any point in striving for any reunification, people coming together? Should you go for that, or do you just let everything break down, burn it all down, and see where it goes, start it over? So that's where we are, and we do have some interesting positions here. I want to say that I'm sitting here in Canada. I'm relatively, slightly detached from the situation because I'm in Canada. It's the only country in the world where abortion is legal at any time during pregnancy for any reason whatsoever. I mean, for no reason even. It's not like that in, say, Germany, where it's, I think, 13 weeks, and in France it's 12 weeks, and other places it's different. But so Canada's the only country. So we have it relatively okay. Anybody who needs in Spitz, if you ever need an abortion, you know where to go. Well, you never. I shouldn't assume you're, uteruses.
Well, I was kind of opposed to it personally, which is how I became an accidental parent.
Yeah, you know what? That's a whole other podcast. So, I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with you, Spitz, because you've got a very sort of distinct, straightforward position on this. What do you want to let it all burn? Right.
Well, I'm in favor of facilitating, if not encouraging, the inevitable. I think what we all learned, especially after the 2016 election, as to how polarized the United States is and is progressively becoming. And it was really a harbinger of everything we're experiencing now in terms of the dissolution of the social structure, the fragmentation into almost geographic regions that hold particular values. And now, to your point, these landmark SCOTUS rulings and imminent rulings that we should expect for the next term. And I'm slowly becoming into the idea that we need to almost let this happen, that it's the American experiment playing itself out as an oscillation between the power of the federal government and those assigned to the individual states. It goes all the way back to the Compromise of 1790, with Hamilton basically agreeing to pay off the state debt in exchange for Jefferson and Madison to relinquish some of the states' rights and move the capital of the country to D.C. And ever since then, it's been an ongoing battle for autonomy and control between the individual states and the federal government, with ostensibly the federal government winning. Maybe the tide is turning to the point where we should rethink the entire experiment, avoid civil war, and see how the United States evolved into a plurality where majority rules, where geographical mobility might empower people to live the way they want to or have to, and we see what happens from there.
So, Jay, go ahead. But I want to ask you, for both of you, and Jay, go first. But is this really about states' rights? Because for the entire time they've been talking about how, like, say with the Roe v. Wade, like, we should leave it up to the states. That's been the whole conservative argument in favor of federalism, that it should be states' rights. But now that it is, right, now they're talking about having a national ban on abortion. They're actually going out to, like, out of state abortions. They're trying to limit people from going out of state. So is it really about states' rights? I mean, it's obviously about something. I mean, they do want a national ban, right? I mean, the states' rights is just sort of like the political vehicle through which they're trying to.
I mean, that's my position, that it's we could tackle this in a lot of ways. We could take them at their word that this is about states' rights, and I think it's a bit of a psychological cover for something much deeper. I'm more interested in sort of psychoanalyzing what the tension has always really been about, which, I study philosophy, and that's where I want to take it, is sort of psychoanalyzing and getting into the philosophical arguments against the, let's call it small L liberalism project and the experiment of America. But there was something that you said in the opening way to phrase this question, and sort of the prompt for this whole thing, which is like move towards unity or move towards division. I think there's almost a myth about America being the experiment of, can we achieve unity? Can we agree, given this kind of plurality? What do we agree on? Like, what makes us American, and finding those fibers between us. It's a line that's been used a lot, but that most places were nations before they were states because of natural sort of evolution. But America is a place that was a state before it was a nation. It was just like this geographical place, and we've been struggling to figure out how to become a nation ever since then. I think there's almost something a little backwards about that. I think that's almost what's breaking. If I could rephrase the American experiment, not to be an experiment about how do you agree when everyone has radically different ideas, like what Mookie wrote. I read your sort of proposal for America. Like, yes, we're going to have radically different ideas about what the good life is, to bring a sort of philosophical term in, and how we ought to structure societies and how we ought to maximize our own flourishing. We're always going to disagree on that. But what do we agree on? Is that what America's about? But I actually kind of want to flip it. I've been trying this a lot more lately. I'm convinced that if we actually dig in deeper and deeper, and the best way to conceive of the American experiment is learning how to actually disagree well, which is so much harder than agreeing on something superficial.
That's hard.
It's really hard. And you know what makes disagree? Yeah. And that word now, because imagine disagreeing well now with the internet and 24/7 cable news, and I don't think the American experiment is going to fail, Mookie. I'm with you. Like, it's crumbling and failing. I'm going to argue that it shouldn't. I'll throw some Hail Marys about maybe it shouldn't. But future historians, I think, will have a lot of good books about why it failed. But the easy, obvious answer is, like, it just didn't survive the infosphere, because you can't disagree well. Because, just to leave it here, if you figure out deeply how to disagree with a conservative and a liberal and really understand their own positions at a deep level, that's actually where you find the unity. Because when you disagree so deeply, you'll find the same incredibly deep existential kind of anxiety about these deep, big questions about what is the good life and what is a meaningful life. This is why I'm a fan of Fukuyama's work, who does a really good job, although he's a raging liberal and globalist, of really understanding the flaws in liberal globalism and the sort of the hollow moral core of it, which is what conservatives are always skeptical. Can you really build a nation without and this is why I think states' rights is a total sort of red herring here. The conservative skepticism is that you can't build a meaningful life and a meaningful nation without a moral core that's strong and well-defined, which sounds like a strong topic, whether that's the church or whether that's a state or whether that's just a strong culture. Like France has, cultural things that are secular, but very, very French. America has not had that. And conservatives have always been rather skeptical of what happens to a nation without that it descends into sort of, vapid individualism. So that's my beginning of my pushback, or at least
okay.
analogy.
But my one comment, though, is that there are deep fundamental value systems that are diametrically opposed to each other, which fuels the polarization. And if you look at it issue by issue, what, the SCOTUS was debating the difference between fundamental rights and liberty interests. The fundamental rights is conceived by conservatives today very tremendously and are at odds with those of their liberal counterparts.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that it's values driven, but it's values driven from both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely.
In a way that's almost intractable. So what you have is a deep fissure in terms of what people believe should be the moral underpinnings of the United States of America.
Yeah.
And although I agree with you in concept that the states' rights issue might be a red herring, it's something that we could grasp, and it's a potential solution to avoid the inevitability, as you say, of the dissolution of the country, right? Fukuyama's title of that one famous book was The End of History, right? He saw moral liberal values as part of globalization. That if everything went according to plan, there was almost a Hegelian teleological endpoint to human civilization that encompassed humanism, equality, and fair trade. And guess what? The exact opposite has happened. You've got authoritarianism in China with a bourgeoisie middle class and capitalism, right? And then you've got this splintering, not only of the United States, but of the entire world order, largely to your point, because of the expansion of the infosphere, right? Which people were saying the internet would liberate humanity and enable instantaneous global communication. Well, guess what? It also enabled fake news, bullshit, and propaganda.
Right.
And Russia just invaded Ukraine. We're back to a World War II style conflict. One step forward, two steps back.
Yeah.
So, I agree with you again, but the question then becomes pragmatically, what can be done to mend this situation? And what could we do as Americans if we do have irreconcilable differences? We cannot fundamentally define and differentiate a fundamental right from a liberty interest. Then where do we go from here?
Yeah,
that's what I'm wondering. So,
so like a couple responses to it is as far as the internet and what it's done, not only politically in the way you sort of laid out the problems of the bomb that it set off, but also on a personal level of people disconnecting from each other. Everyone sees their kids staring at their phones. I think there's a sense and a very sort of deep conservative anxiety about what they're seeing of sort of this individualization that's happening to everyone. And they would never phrase it this way, but it's a bit of an I told you so moment. Like it's a bit of an I told you this would happen if we didn't sort of mandate a strong moral core from someone. And that's a hard thing to respond to. But to your point of the pragmatic, the reason why I don't think sort of just like letting it fall into the state's hands and going full direction avoid civil war is well, maybe it avoids civil war, but you actually are talking about splitting the country, I presume, at that point, because just pragmatically.
No, not necessarily. Once again, it's not a dissolution into separate countries, but there could be a glue, and from kind of a libertarian sensibility of the night watchman concept, right?
So
what should the role of what should the role of the federal government be? Maintain fair trade between states, perhaps, right? Maintain the military.
Right.
For the overall protection of the boundaries, and maintain infrastructure and codependencies between the states. I don't know. It's an idea.
But just play out the experiment, right? Yeah. Sorry, if you just play out the experiment, and we could take guesses of what border this would be, but all you have to ask is sort of when you have a situation where two states that literally are adjacent to each other and share a border, a state border, when does that border start behaving and acting just de facto like a national border? And let's say this is, it maybe a real example or a farcical example. It's probably not abortion. That's going to be a hard one for me to think through, but guns rights. If let's say some state is like, agrees with you, Mookie, being like a fundamental liberty is that we all have as many guns as we want and no restrictions.
Yeah.
And their neighbor,
restriction.
Right, no restrictions. And their neighbor, because one, they're reactionary. They're both reactionary, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But their neighbor reacts in exactly the opposite manner and says, like, no guns for anyone because public safety is more important and blah, blah, blah. And that state says, you know what we're going to do, because we're not going to just like arrest people after we find guns on them when we pull them over for speeding or something. No, cars that are coming in from your state into our state, we're going to stop them and we're going to check the trunk and we're going to check the car. We're going to make sure they don't have any guns, because, you know, that's how we're going to enforce this. We're not going to wait for the shooting and then deal with it. And they say that's what we want to do at our border. Well, okay, what you have now is a checkpoint between two states. You play enough of these up and it gets nasty enough, and you just have a national border that's created. And now, and even worse, it is written into the Constitution that the federal government, you know, almost sort of mentioned it there, will sort of handle the borders between states and free flow and free commerce. So what would
you have a constitutional, you do have a constitutional right to be able to go out of state, right? I mean, that's
no, but if a state says like, we want to enforce our border, and we want to do this by frisking everyone who comes in from I don't know, guess a state, maybe Nevada, and Texas.
They'll find a way. I know what you mean.
Yeah, but so you're going to ask the federal government to come in with National Guards, I presume, and patrol this border for you, and then what? Then you're at the Supreme Court asking the federal government to look at a state. Like, these sound like crazy scenarios. They could actually happen, which is insane. Maybe New Jersey and Pennsylvania, if Pennsylvania's governor goes in a certain direction. Like, there's a couple borders where this could really ignite. And it happens to be these reactionary borders, right? You're always looking for Austin in the middle of Texas is the place where things will blow up. It's not like Louisiana where everybody sort of is already very red. It's everybody is just pissing on each other's lawn, because we are now in this really nasty existential fight. So I don't see how going full states' rights. I get, and then of course there's the pragmatic of like, well, human rights. What if how far can a state go to make up its own laws? And then you also have the like obvious inequality of I have a little bit of money, I can move out of state if I'm bored with it. But if you're poor and you can't just uplift your family, like, it's voting with your feet is a bit of a farce, and everyone, it's a thing that's played off way too much in pragmatics terms.
So I got a question, like in terms of this, the ideological differences, right, that are happening. I mean, there was I don't know. I mean, Spitz, you and I think grew up a little bit earlier than Jay here, right? And we remember when it was.
Are you saying that we're wiser? We're wiser, right?
We're wiser.
Yeah.
I just turned 40. I've got a 4 in front of my.
Oh, that's so cute. Anyway, so like these elections, and
I'll arm wrestle. I'll arm wrestle both you mofos right now.
Well, actually, he's right. Yeah, he's at his peak right now. So you had 49 states going for Reagan, and one state went for Walter Mondale. I mean, you know how it was. Like, people were sort of more independent minded. You had like one newscast 2 times a day, and everybody watched that. There wasn't. So people did disagree at that time too. There were still conservatives and liberals, and the Republicans and Democrats, but nobody thought that the other side was evil. Right. There wasn't a judgment where the other side is just, we should not associate with them at all. Like, if my brother wears a MAGA hat, right, I'm just never going to talk to him again. Our relationship is done. Like, that never used to happen. So my question is that this isn't just something that's happening in the U.S. This is something that's happening all over the world, right? So it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in Austria, like all of these places. So how are the other countries doing it? Are they all splitting up? Are they all sort of, is there this kind of malignant, like Jay said, the inability to disagree without being disagreeable?
No, I think the opposite. Look at China with the Uyghurs. That's authoritarian control. They have a ethnic and religious minority that's thrown into re-education camps, which are just a euphemism for concentration camps. They're sterilizing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, right? It's almost genocide. Control. So the answer to your question is China. No, there's no dissolution. There's no fragmentation. Xi is not going to hand. Guess what? Taiwan. Taiwan is next, folks, and there's nothing we can do about it. Look at Russia.
I'm talking about
with Ukraine. No, I'm answering your question, I think,
Yeah.
which is you asked how are other countries dealing with this, and my answer to that, for the most part, is through authoritarian control. But democratic countries are struggling. They're out. Look at France, oscillating between Le Pen and back again.
Yeah,
so they have a lot of the same issues.
It's getting called nationalism. I mean, India is pseudo democracy, but is an ethno nationalist movement.
Yeah.
You've got countries that are more cultural nationalist movements. That in France, I would say Le Pen is a cultural nationalist movement. You've got, of course, religious national movements. We've had Islamofascism for a while. They all have different names, and that's why I think it's smarter to put Trump and what's happening in America and SCOTUS as. That's why the states' rights thing, it's cute and it's how it will look and sound, but it's clearly not a really good theory for what's underneath this. It's a global recoil from, and to your point, I think Fukuyama was humbled a lot over the last decade by that. And
he sure was, and all liberals were.
All liberals
all
were.
liberals.
And I think if you kept up with
news flash.
Right. So what was that thing that they were way too confident about? And we have to actually, I think Fukuyama's recent work has shown this. That's why I really like the thing that I recommend from Foreign Affairs. It's a really good article, but it's fair to what he calls the reasonable skepticism that a radical agnosticism towards defining what the good life is from above, which is really the American experiment, going back to the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, even the Enlightenment, a word that Ali, you've used a lot and wanted to sort of bring to the Middle East. This is an important time for the entire world about this philosophy, because it has a giant psychological hole in the middle of it, which is that its strength is actually also perceived as its weakness. And to be fair to the conservative-minded humans on Earth, they've played along pretty well for it, whether they had a choice or not. And now they're really throwing a tantrum with his, like, we could talk about it in economic terms of, like, you left me out of the party, which is, the coal miners or whatever, but also in sort of a social level. They were always skeptical that what does a society look like when you're radically agnostic about defining what the good life is. And we're just going to let people play around with that, right? And I'm on board with it, but it's hard. Yeah.
I think the flip side of it is Maslow's, triangle of basic needs. So I think what we're finding is that if you have a decent and even robust middle class, okay, with a high level, a high standard of living, education, healthcare, back to Steven Pinker's works in terms of the data analytics and demonstrating that the overall quality of life for the average human on planet Earth, the 8.2 billion of us, is qualitatively and quantitatively superior to the generation before and the generation. It's safer, we're living longer, and it's healthier, and everyone is better educated. Amid this clusterfuck of war, authoritarianism, fragmentation. So I think the answer to your question and what makes this so difficult is it's not just values driven. It depends upon economic stability and trade and technology and success. And that adds a veneer of ambiguity to the philosophy, which is it about liberalism? Is it about that teleological quest for the good life? Is it grounded in humanist values? No, it's grounded on everybody having an Xbox, a pot to piss in, and a safe place for their kids to play. And I think that utilitarian reality, the Chinese learned this lesson, right? Which is if you elevate the middle class and you empower them, you stabilize society and thereby gain even greater control. It's the opposite of the Stalinistic point of view where you just kill everybody. And I think that's a trend that we're experiencing, and it's in direct opposition to the liberalist aspirations of what that good life is considered in terms of grounding in equality, fraternity, right? All the great French Revolution ideals. Most countries are calling bullshit on that. And that's one thing that we have to deal with.
didn't you prove yourself wrong in the middle of that? You're saying all boats rose, but all this anger is there. Clearly, it's clearly not that simple. We got a lot more Xboxes, but where's all this anger coming from? Even the angry.
There's a lot of anger, and it's impacting quality of life. But the overall statistical reality and existential situation of the average human being is steadily improving. Despite all this shit.
I completely disagree with the word existential in that. I would say physiological, absolutely,
right.
But existential, I think, absolutely not.
I don't know. It's like, poverty down, famine down, education up, health better.
Yeah.
So that's the contradiction, though, and that I think is what addresses your point of view, which is we used to think that it was values grounded. And I'm not so sure. We're proven wrong time and time again. And we're proven wrong in this country. We have a whole echelon, a whole swath of the American population who literally doesn't believe in democracy anymore. The whole Stop the Steal movement is shitting all over the most fundamental principle of our democracy, which is free and fair elections.
Right.
They don't believe in it anymore. They don't care. So where do we go from there? Right. And how do you change that?
So what another, speaking of changing that, so you guys are, talking about states, civil war, those, enforcing state borders and making them like national borders. There's a lot of other stuff that's happening. I mean, you have red states, you have blue states, right? There are people like Spitz, you talked before, like we talked earlier about voting with your feet, right? I mean, discuss that. So when people are voting with their feet, they're not just voting with their feet. It's not just they're going to leave one state for another because they want to vote better. There are people who are leaving California for red states, and these are liberal people, right? Because they're just sick of all the regulations. I mean, there were what was it, Bill Maher, who waited 2,000 days or something?
for his solar garden.
Solar, I know. This is in California. So he's doing that. Now
you got his Hispanics for Trump. By the droves, right?
And it's not
okay.
And even if they're not for Trump, like I know I have liberal friends, I have like physician friends who are just tired of all of the taxation, regulation, and everything in some of these blue states, and they're moving to Texas, right? They're going to Texas. Now, what's happening is so they're not just voting with their feet; they're moving for the same sort of Maslow's hierarchy reasons.
Feed me, make me rich.
Texas is essentially a battleground state now. Okay, Georgia went blue, right? There's a lot of these states they're changing. So does that also, when we're talking about disagreeing, being able to disagree, in a cordial way, is that also something? How is that going to change things?
You mean the fragmentation internally and this oscillation between left and right?
Well, and not only that, but let's see, the left and right ideologically, right? They're very disparate. Okay, they're becoming more and more fragmented. They hate each other. But when it comes to these, just demographically, the individual demographics of each state, they're becoming more and more blurred because there are a lot of people who are just moving
I can tell you
economic reasons for other, like they're not. That's what I'm saying. They're not just voting with their feet. They're moving to other states, to redder states, because they don't want to pay as much. They want to save more money. They want to be able to afford a house. They don't want, they want to survive recessions.
The state that I'm in right now of North Carolina is a perfect example of it.
There you go, Jay.
Well, I think it still has like the most rapid growth or something. It's insane how many people are moving here, and they're blue people, and the red people know that. One of the cases that has me worried that I mentioned, it's in the October term, but people were like shaken by SCOTUS in the last term. It's going to be Mookie sort of like forecast one. Moore versus Harper is the one I'm about to talk about, which is North Carolina sort of gerrymandering.
Right.
But there's affirmative action, which frankly is not that popular on either side of the aisle, is going to get totally erased, and we'll be done with it as an experiment in the middle of the midterms, because that's or they're going to hear the case. Maybe they'll give the opinion a bit later if they're trying to avoid some waves, but that's going to go too. And a lot of liberals are going to freak out over that, especially in North Carolina. One of the defendants is UNC, actually. The other one I think is Harvard or Yale, one of those two. But so in North Carolina, it's a state where the demographics are changing really rapidly. And as you mentioned, and I think I must have made this point before, we don't have blue and red states. We have blue cities and we have red areas. You will not
100%.
You will not find a map of any city with a population of more than like even a 5,000. Tiny. The urban center is always blue. We have blue cities and we have red areas. North Carolina is no different, but it's changing, and it's changing in a way that next election it's going to be really, really close and probably go blue, I would say. The Republicans know this. So if you want any proof that this isn't, like, they're concerned about federal elections and losing control of, their heritage here as well. So the Moore versus Harper case, if they win it, depending on how the opinion is written, has a potential to basically allow states to write their entire system of elections, because there's this goes back to your Hamilton and Jefferson stuff. This is very old stuff about who gets, but this is purely about federal elections. The first map that the Republicans drew here was insanely gerrymandered. It's like a 50-50 state. In the presidential election, it was like 49.6 to 49.1 or something like that. But the probable outcome of the Republican drawn map was going to give them an 11-3 advantage, likely, or possibly 10-4 in the House. This was rejected by a judge here, saying, like, this is crazy. I mean, literally the county that I'm in, which is very blue, was split into 3. It was like one of these insane maps that was really written unfairly. This was rejected and then upheld by the court, that basically they redrew the map, the sort of an independent panel, and it's going to be used in this next election. But it's being challenged, and the Supreme Court's taking up the case, basically saying that the judge of the state doesn't have the right to do that, because it says in the Constitution that state legislations can decide the time and manner of the place of the. And if you read it really literally, and that's all it says, they're like, hey, we get to do what we're going to do. So part of the nightmare of stealing the next election is already baked into a literalist interpretation of the Constitution. Like, we're pretty screwed generally. Well, I'll say that. I've always said, when you lose the courts, you lose the country. I don't know if we've lost the court in that they're making stuff up at this point, because they're not. And I've been saying this about abortion for a while. It's all in there, and you could read it in a way that's not totally out of left field to basically gut the entire federal experiment and throw it back to the states. So
that's my point, guys. I mean, again, in full transparency, I believe in gay rights. I believe every woman should have the power to abort, within reason, 2 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever, right? I'm a very, progressive, liberal, humanitarian kind of guy, but other people aren't. It's not my opinion that matters. I was a theater critic in Chicago for over a year. And when I went in to review a play, it wasn't whether I liked it or not, but whether I thought they did a good job representing the material, bringing it to life. It's the same point of view I have with regard to this issue. I just looked at the Pew Research data, and it seems that abortion, it's 50% of the population in Texas are opposed to it, and 48% want it to be legal. So it's close, but a majority are in agreement with SCOTUS in Texas. And when you look at it,
is it in all cases, like rape and incest exceptions? I don't know the data. I'd be surprised.
I mean, there's nuances, but the general opinion is that they agree with the SCOTUS opinion. Okay, so when we look at statistics that 81% of the country is opposed to it, again, to your point, it's specific based on cities and based on states and how you slice the data. So what I'm essentially trying to get at, and reinforcing your point with this latest issue, is that we're headed toward this fragmentation. The question then becomes, to the point of this whole title of the podcast, do we let it rip? Or do we keep fighting what I consider an uphill battle for trying to unify the United States, for having this kind of oppression of liberal values according to the conservatives, or just let things kind of splinter?
What is that battle of reunification? So, Jay, you said that it was about like getting people to disagree in a better way,
right?
So disagree. But what is? I mean, that's a nice idea, but how do
what are we gonna do? Right?
What's the execution?
Yeah, let me, because I realize, Mookie, you're speaking as a political analyst, and I've been speaking a bit of as a philosopher. I don't disagree with you. I don't know what to do. I'm not a political analyst, and if we were sitting there doing this, like, what do we do about this problem? I'm kind of at a loss as well. I could try to come up with ideas. I'm just trying to get under of like what actually all of this might really be about. And my only Hail Mary is to try to answer Ali with a sort of like, what kind of forum or place can we actually project some sort of humility from liberals, back to that point, about what we were really wrong about sort of the project. And to your point, and I'm with you, if you just bribe people enough, they'll probably quiet down and just abandon the revolution. If you actually did build the middle class, I mean, we could talk about things like income inequality. If you wanted me to be like, do one thing, I would say that. But the fact that corporate America is such a stranglehold on economics, we're in a wicked problem where the people who are tasked with solving that problem benefit from the perpetuation of the problem, and it's probably not going to get better. But yes, I totally agree with you. You could, if you raise all boats genuinely and you had a genuine middle class that was doing well, they might be annoyed that, you know, Susie down the street is changing her gender this week or whatever, but they're probably just going to play Xbox and they're not going to freak out. Yes. Whatever. But when the oranges at the store cost $20 and you're not making any money, and your CEO is making 400 times or whatever, wherever we're up to in this country, and Silicon Valley is taking your job, all that stuff triggers you eventually, and you do get a revolution. So as a political analysis, I think you got it right. The answer, what we do about it, is actually try to bribe people to stop the revolution before they start it. Like, let's give people money and hope that works. But I do think we've already crossed a tripwire where it's maybe I've been putting it wrong, that it's, you know, you keep pushing back on saying it's not really about values. When Ali, you say like, what really is this divide about? And I've talked about this on my podcast a lot, and I think abortion is a perfect issue for it, because that's why I asked you about the rape and incest thing. The abortion issue reveals perfectly this existential deep anxiety. I want to put it as an anxiety rather than a value-based system, because I actually not that into the word values in that, but an anxiety. And I'll make the argument really quickly, but I've been convinced, and nothing has changed my mind about it, that the conservative point of view is one that is ultimately terrified and anxious of a world without consequences, where we can absolve ourselves of a natural order of things and there's consequences. And if you spread your legs and got pregnant, the consequences are you have a baby. They'll put it in much nicer words, like it's a blessing and this is an opportunity for you, and, you know, life begins at conception or whatever. But the fact that and just about everyone has this. I want to point this out. This is not just conservative. Just about everybody, as liberal as we all are, will react a little differently when I give you the story of someone who slept around and was super, irresponsible and partying too much and had like 4 abortions already and just wants another one because she got pregnant and doesn't know who the dad is, versus a woman who gets raped in the park brutally by like a relative and then gets pregnant. Like, the fact that you react differently to the moral decision of getting the abortion, even just a tiny bit, reveals that, like, okay, we all have an instinct somewhere in us about, like, what's the only variable there? It's clearly not life begins at conception. It's clearly not killing a baby is murder or anything like that. It's the behavior of the woman. And we're concerned about that. And the conservative ethic is really worried about a world where we could absolve ourselves or engineer ourselves out of consequences. Changing your gender, basically saying I get to reinvent myself and be whatever I want and I could do whatever I want, is an affront to them on a very deep sort of. It's why religion makes sense for them, and Christianity is how it comes out in a lot of ways. But there's legitimacy to it as well.
There is consistency when you paint the story that way. But when you look at the history behind abortion, it goes back to Ronald Reagan. It goes back to abortion being a non-issue and suddenly propelled into a wedge issue for the sake of political expedience. Look at gun control. You had the Black Panthers rolling into the state capitol fully armed, okay, and triggering the shit out of white Southerners that if they're coming for those black dudes' guns, they're coming for our guns too. And voila, the NRA was born, okay, as a pivotal, powerful lobbying organization. But these are almost circumstantial, ad hoc events in the history of the country. And when you raise arguments about, abortion and ostensibly a licentiousness of young women, okay, I get that. That fits the evangelical kind of puritanical mindset. But at the same time, you could counter that by saying, well, wouldn't evangelicals be all about child support free nursing,
Mookie, I have to interrupt because this is the classic misunderstanding. A lot of liberals make the joke of being like they're pro-life but pro-death penalty. There must be a contradiction here. Zero contradiction, because if you take on my it's consequences.
It's about consequences.
It's an innocent.
I'm with you. It fits the story well. So you have a mixture of this kind of historical randomness of wedge issues coming. But why are they wedge issues? Well, they're wedge issues because of what you mentioned being deeply rooted. And again, I'm bringing up values, personal values, like don't fuck around. Behave yourself, right? Be a civilized human being according to how we define it within that constraint. And there's a lot of underpinnings of, racism and a hatred of diversity. It's like, Public Enemy pretty much saying it's fear of a black planet. Okay. And that's the drug war in essence. And it has a lot to do with the chatter, the implicit chatter that's going on. Well, white people are an increasing minority in this country. Yeah. And they're terrified. They see the stats. They see the same Pew numbers that I do, and they shit their pants. White heterosexual men are going to be in a minority. Well, there goes the country.
Mookie, how would you, if I could ask you as a political analyst, because we have a perfect example now of a wedge, and I totally loved that. The analysis is right. I think it jives with my point. If these become wedge issues because they can tap so deeply into the stuff I'm talking about. Right. Okay, so same-sex marriage is one. And first of all, I think the media kind of overdid it with like what they think Thomas wrote. He really literally wrote in his opinion that believe me, I think he wants to overturn it, but there's not a totally straight line from what he wrote in Dobbs to do it. But I believe it might get challenged again. So that might be.
It will get challenged. Ted Cruz is ahead of the curve again. So, lying Ted. He's telling the truth here.
So what would you say as a political analyst to avoid? Because that one could trigger some pretty ridiculous state fights. And what would you say? I've got my ideas. How would you say that it's a wedge issue? The media in both parties will try to make a really big one. I think I know what's behind it on a deep existential level. I don't know how to turn that into political action that actually avoids a civil war. Are you actually advocating for just let the states do what they want and nullify those marriages in Texas? Because they'll do it in Texas because they want to piss off Austin, who's watching them. That's how this works, right?
Right. Once again, personally, marry whomever you want. I wish it could be mandated. We could educate people that homosexuality isn't the horror that many people have grown up to think it is. Live and let live. Be with anyone you want. Do whatever you want. But the reality is, tens of millions of people think it's sinful or gross. And many, many millions of people are closeted and in denial, fueling that fire, right? So that's just how they feel. It's the same thing with abortion. Tens of millions of people were happy about the SCOTUS ruling, blissed out. They were partying and celebrating while liberals were losing their mind. Okay. so that's the essence of what I'm getting at, which is they're intractable, diametrically opposed, values driven sensibilities and worldviews.
I think we can't change it. Ali wants to jump in, but I think I have something.
No, Jay, go first, because I'm gonna take it.
Mine is short, because what if I sort of came to me as you were talking, if my concern is sort of existential meaning based, and I'm happy to talk about it because I think it's behind the same-sex marriage thing as well, and the institution of marriage being non-sacred somehow by cheapening it in this way. And if we've lost everything else, and if we've lost the church, and if we've lost football, and if we've lost Friday night sports, if we've lost all the things that used to bind us together that were important on sort of a conservative level, and I would argue just a human level in some ways, well, marriage is, something that we can't lose and we have to defend and blah, blah, blah. But if I could take that analysis and turn it into something you said, being like, you're the political analyst, and I don't doubt that if we gave people enough money and enough toys, they might calm the hell down. Is there a way to translate?
They won't calm down.
At this point, maybe not.
Issue.
Right. So at this point, maybe not. So what if I'm saying is, and this, I don't know the answer to this, but if basically what I'm saying is that, and this might get weird, but that we're talking about an economic imbalance and sort of wealth not being distributed well or whatever, if meaning and access to sort of like meaning and a deeper existential sort of assuaging of people's deepest anxieties is also somehow has a middle class where we feel like we have access to it, they probably won't give a shit about who wants to get married down the street, because they really didn't like 10 years ago. That was a fairly
Jay,
easy win.
they do though. That's all I'm saying. I'm just like, smell the coffee. Where is the country and where is it going?
So
this issue is not going away.
I'm with you. I have skepticism that people genuinely kind of are going to forge these worlds for themselves in a way that genuinely make them happy. I don't think they're going to be happy in that world with a bunch of guns and just a Christian theocracy. It's just maybe they're
so then it fails, and then they go back to gay parades and people doing bumps at circuit parties till 4 a.m. and then everyone is happy. Well, let it do its thing, But who is to mandate this shit?
I wonder about that. Look, a lot of we're kind of talking about this as if the U.S. system is just democratic, like a proper functioning democratic system, which it isn't. So the majority of Republicans favor same-sex marriage now. A majority of Republicans in the U.S.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, Republicans overall, conservatives are a minority. They're a solid minority in the United States. Liberals are a majority. Nobody looks at the popular vote anymore. Does anybody care? Has anybody cared about the popular vote in the last 8 years? Like last 16 years even? Nobody has. You've had several elections where there was the electoral college versus the popular vote. So the majority of people in the U.S. right now are liberals, which is why Republicans, what are the things that they're really, really going for to try and cement their power and keep their influence intact? The most undemocratic elements of the U.S. system. So the Supreme Court basically makes the U.S. an oligarchy of sorts, right? The Senate, where 52 senators represent 18% of the population, okay? And Wyoming has the same number of senators, right?
By design. My buddy Jefferson and Madison made that happen. Keep the states powerful, right?
They died hundreds of years ago.
That's I know, but that's just vestigial tissue acknowledging this dichotomy between the feds and the states.
It's really, really
the Senate exists. The Senate exists to keep this structure, right? The Senate exists.
All of that, you're right. Yes, I'm not disputing any of that. But I'm just saying that it is still, the Senate is still one of the most undemocratic components of the U.S.
By
system.
design.
Of course, by the same thing with the Supreme Court by design, the Electoral College too by design. But all of these are they're generally, these are the things that Mitch McConnell, who is an absolute, he's like, time has proven that he's an absolute political genius, probably one of the biggest political geniuses in U.S. history, and what he's been able to do, hiding behind Trump, going on and tweeting, and everybody, all the media is running out. Liberals are tweeting in rage in response to Trump, and then he's just sort of transforming the judiciary in the background, right? So now you have played the long game. 5 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote at least once. Okay, Trump and Bush. You've got your Senate, yes, by design. You've got the Supreme Court. So we're the U.S. is a liberal country. So how long can this last? The majority of the
but back to my point, Ali. My point though is dissolve SCOTUS. Dissolve Congress.
I want.
All right, do you see what I mean? You're reinforcing my point.
I am. Listen,
and I don't mean that facetiously. That SCOTUS should do fair trade agreements between states.
Yeah.
Right. And federal taxation of things.
That's the end of the American experiment, and that's just countries like the EU, which have a loose sort of military alliance and a trade alliance. If you want to go there, we could go there.
I'm recommending it. Mookie, I'm not saying they're going to do it.
We haven't. I'm sure there's a challenge that's so obvious that we haven't even just put it on the table yet. Of how do you respond to we get all of you. You know, you're doing this sort of hard ass, this is how it is. And I agree. But don't we have the inconvenient truth, that's an intentional pun, of all of these problems that we're facing that seem to demand cooperation and global cooperation, really, when you're talking about something like climate change, but nuclear armament, all this kind of stuff. I mean, we're facing problems that, like it or not, we cannot dissolve into individual nodes that just, you know, it's a terrible idea if your neighbor doesn't believe in climate change and is polluting your air, because the air doesn't care about this podcast. Right. The air doesn't care about
what just happened. What just happened with the Paris Accord, and what just happened with our participation? We rejoined the Paris Accord, right? And then we can't do shit because Joe Manchin pulled the plug. The one dude. So it's a moot point.
The EPA at SCOTUS. No, but
it's
this
being
is a problem.
gutted.
But this is a problem.
Yeah. It's a problem. Yeah. I get it, but even with the unified,
your solution makes worse, is what I'm saying. Like the let it fall makes it worse. Right?
That's a good point. Actually, you know, that Joe Manchin and, you know, what is it, Kristen Sinema? I remember everybody's happy in the atheist community because she's an atheist, she's a senator, and now they're all kidding themselves. But anyway, so both of these guys. Yeah, that's been a disappointment. That's a whole other podcast. But so both of these, this is another thing that you know, talk about reunification. I mean, there isn't any unification among Democrats anyway. Liberals. I mean, it's whether it's these two, whether it's like, you know, the squad, you know, the Bernie Sanders camp versus the Hillary and her emails and all. Like the whole thing is
here's another thing.
Republicans are united, you know, like they're
and the Ukraine war has slowed down our carbon footprint effort by a decade. Look at Germany, right? They pulled the plug on nuke power, which is the dumbest thing I've ever read in my life. And now they're increasingly dependent, and we've gone backwards by 5 years probably in terms of addressing the greenhouse gas issue, because of these crises right now, precipitated by the Ukraine war, even with the system that we have in place right now. So I agree with you that fragmentation of the United States along these lines will complicate things, but it's already complicated. And if the temperature, look at in the UK, it was 104 degrees record. It might be too late, but when it's too hot to go outside and all your crops are dying and you're starving to death, you're going to have to do something. So it's almost like this Adam Smith invisible hand that you can apply on a macro level, which is like when the pendulum oscillates from one extreme to another, it's based on pragmatic expedience, and there's a tipping point. And then you do what you got to do.
That safety ethic, it just eventually breaks, right? It works for some things that are low stakes, but when you're playing with nuclear weapons, you're not just like, oh, whoops, we screwed up, let's learn from that mistake. Like when it's a whole country.
There is mutual assured destruction. So I
exactly.
Agree with you.
I mean, we're facing.
I want to get to like over that. So we've got around 40 more minutes, and I wanted to like let's
shake it up a little bit.
I want to talk about two things. First of all, the first thing is, you know, you said dissolve SCOTUS, so I want to hear a little bit more about that, the dissolve SCOTUS, and the other thing is I want to talk about the liberals and what they're doing, what they're up to, because that's
that's even more frustrating and interesting.
I want to actually, but first of all, you said dissolve SCOTUS. So is the U.S. an oligarchy? I mean, now you have, you know, again, 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices appointed by presidents who didn't win the popular vote. You know, there's like a 6-3. There's no, they're all lifetime appointments. So this is how it's going to be for the next several decades. What is, when you say dissolve SCOTUS, how do you do it? Like, what do you, or is it?
Well, again, it's contingent on this fantasy, this counterfactual, futuristic Spitz world of Rollerball, right? You see the movie Rollerball with energy, food. In that paradigm, the United States was divided into corporate entities responsible for basic utilities, technology, right? So my fantasy world here is a dissolution of the federal government to the point where it's a skeletal construct responsible essentially just for infrastructure and mandating relationships between states. That's the precept. So SCOTUS has no place in this aside from just being the arbiter of petty disagreements between states, to the border issue that Jay was mentioning. And then, anything related to infrastructure, the army, things that are responsible in terms of national unity, the very few things. So that's the construct. And am I right or wrong? I don't know. But to your point, Ali, we've gone from a Ruth Gator Ginsburg boner of liberal values coming into fruition, okay, for decades, culminating in same-sex marriage, Roe v. Wade being protected, all of transgender rights, and we're flipping. And there are people who are upset, but there's a lot of people who are happy too. And to your point, who's ever sitting in the chair calls the shots for every fucking body. And that's the problem. It's the tyranny of the judicial control. Mandated by the feds. And all I'm saying in a Nietzschean kind of way is it's like the multiplicity of norms. It's inevitable. It's a product of human nature. And if we let it roll, I think the benefit outweighs the risk, and getting rid of SCOTUS is just a part of it.
SCOTUS become stronger? Well, has SCOTUS become stronger because of the essential incompetence of the legislative branch? I mean,
exactly. That was going to be my point.
That's a factor.
I know. Right. I mean, in the sense that they could really codify a lot of these things that they're having issues with.
I wanted to. It's funny because some people are like, let's pack the court, but Mookie, let's go to zero.
Just burn it down. Just go home.
I like that.
Go home.
No, I don't. I don't like it.
Abolish SCOTUS.
I don't have a solution, but let me put something for anybody who watches that or is watching, is that, to Ali's point, what you've seen over the last several decades, since the hippie 60s, who thought we were making a lot of progress and getting a lot of these rights or whatever, it was really a mirage, and it's blowing up now. It was a mirage because you always heard these charges of they're legislating from the bench. And frankly, I loved Ruth, her politics. Frankly, I think
too.
But frankly, I don't think she was like the best judge in the world. I'm a nerd. I read a lot of the opinions. Ruth sometimes felt like you were reading MSNBC, and that's when I get afraid, rather than like a judicial thing. I think Breyer was great. I think his loss is actually huge. I think he's a great jurist. And Ruth was
Roberts
great.
Is I know that. Okay, I'm going to get shot for this, but Roberts is a great writer. He's like Roberts is a great writer.
He sucks. He sucks as the Chief Justice. He can't keep his own troops in line.
Well,
everything from the league to the dissolution. He sucks, man. He's a good writer, but he's a bad Chief Justice. Anyway,
to my point, when I make the point that when you lose the court, you lose the country, I'm always looking for the court really just making stuff up. There's been a couple decisions that they've made recently, that the Texas one, the vigilante justice one, Texas versus Women's Health, whatever it was called, that one is awful. That one is way worse than the Dobbs decision, although the Dobbs decision is more, it banned overturned Roe v. Wade, totally did. Actually went further than I predicted in my piece, so I'll own that one. It was worse than I thought it would be. But the Texas one, that one was, and Roberts was up with the minority in that one. He joined the three liberal justices in opposing that opinion. That one is out of their ass. That one is pretty fucked up. Like there is almost zero judicial logic behind that decision. But to my bigger point, the mirage of the last few decades of liberal rights sort of being codified is. And Mookie, you've made this point, and we're sort of alluding to it. The Constitution and the framers really were much more state rights heavy. These were compromises in the Bill of Rights. We almost started with the Civil War in 17 whatever, like right away. And Amendment number 10 has a lot of leeway for the states. If you read it, basically says if it's not in the Constitution and explicitly granted to the federal government, it goes to the states.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but historically, the United States was a chicken shit outback rat hole until basically World War I.
Yeah,
right?
it was
That's
it
when
was a
we
state before it was a nation.
financed, and then World War II. That's when we had world domination. But it's fairly
Right.
recent.
Right.
Most of our history, we are this backwater little shithole country. And why do you need a strong federal government for that? You don't. It's all about the states.
Well, so to my point of this mirage of the march of liberal rights and all this stuff is, and I'm not the first to make this point now, Roe v. Wade was always vulnerable, and I was the one screaming that like we have to protect it because there's nothing like a right to privacy explicitly written in the Constitution. We all know that. It was a bit of a stretch, and frankly, I loved it. I full pro-choice, but that was always vulnerable legally. A lot of these decisions are much more vulnerable legally over the last few years, and they keep writing these decisions. They finally did it. To your point, Ali, that McConnell's a genius, is if the Republican playbook has always been make the government, federal government, as inept as possible, that it can't pass anything, and get this info sphere where everybody's at each other's throats and you're 50-50 at best. I don't know if people take civics anymore. You need 2/3 of the states to propose a convention to hold an amendment proposition, and then you need 3/4 of both houses to pass an amendment. Can you imagine anything meaningful getting through that? Not at all. And I was the one saying you need an amendment that protects women. And here's to my point. If you had that on the books from just about everything I've seen from this bench, which is 6-3 SCOTUS, I had zero doubt that they would throw out, and we talked about this in an older debate. I had zero doubt they would throw out every single Trump challenge. And Mookie, you were wrong about that. You were like, he's going to win him. I was like, they will throw out every single one.
I took the Trump, in all fairness, okay. I took the Trump position like I'm taking this fragmentation position. I wasn't 100% convinced.
The mask slips off. This isn't a.
This is going so well.
Yes, but to that point, they didn't hear a single Trump challenge because they were all like insane. And the courts, these are people who are patriots. They love the law. They generally are going to not totally make things up and legislate from the bench. And they're going to use what they can use. They're conservative now, so they're going to use this literalist interpretation when they want to, whenever it's convenient. Everyone's a hypocrite in politics. Let's just get that out of the way. They're all going to pretend to be literalists when it suits their outcome, and then they're going to be, a little bit looser when it's not going to be. But if the laws were there, the court would follow the law. I really still believe that, even about this court. The laws aren't there.
But Jay, I got it, Jay, but I'm just hearing you speak, and it's like you're laying down almost this didactic, a priori, again, values-driven reality, which is women should have the right to choose. And there are tens of millions of people in this country who just completely disagree with you. So you could talk about the machinations of the court, and you could talk about the eccentricities of history and the vicissitudes of fate, but it begs the question of us being splintered internally in an intractable way. So if I'm a conservative, an evangelical, or a MAGA-maniac listening to you, you're just spouting the liberal way. And you could flip this entire argument around from their point of view, and it could be equally consistent and equally valid. So I agree with you in terms of the logic and the structure and the focus of your argument, but I'm just saying it begs the question of the reality we face, which is this disagreement that we can't seem to get over. So, I get it, but the conservative hearing you speak will be like, well, there's a liberal wanting to have his way, and here's the liberal who wants his values to rule how I rule my family or run my business.
They might think that they should listen to my episode with an abortion because right. If I was talking with someone on a philosophical level and trying to engage them in my position, it would sound, and I would be engaging in their position, and I would really be trying to
I get it, but you have an opinion. Abortion legal. That's it. I mean, that's an opinion.
I have an argument for it. Right. I have an argument for it.
It doesn't matter. They've got arguments too. They have arguments too. And I'm not, espousing the validity of one or the other.
Right.
But all this begs the question of,
No, but what's the question? What is the question? Look, here's the question for you. Why stop at the states? Why not go to municipalities? How low are you going to get? If I'm in Austin and I'm like, well, yeah, I agree with you, Mookie, and I disagree with Ted Cruz, so Austin should have its own laws. Like, how low are you going to get? You've all seen the map of the Middle East that everyone gets their own country. Right. You have to tell me where this principle stops and why.
I don't know. All right. I don't know. So I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And again, I think your arguments are great, but once again, there's implicit bias fueling a lot of it. And, you know, I have a lot of friends on the other side, and they're as impassioned as we are. You know, and many of them are as rational and logical as we are.
Right. So my impulse and my effort, if we're going to save the country, is actually to engage with those people directly, but not trying to find our agreements, but learn how to disagree well. If they were on this show, this would sound very different, and I would love to engage with those people. That's the only way.
Yeah. I'm trying to be their advocate here. You know, I'm trying to say, you know, it's like I have an opinion, you have an opinion. Our opinions actually are similar, but
but I am too trying to be their advocate. And that's where, like, again, I'm not the political strategist, but I'm sure that liberalism needs to urgently project humility and a kind of philosophical humility. Unfortunately, I don't think Biden's the guy to do this at this point anymore. He's just too old. And unfortunately, he used to be the perfect guy for it because he was so establishment. Like, he's just too late.
But humility got our asses kicked, Jay. And now I'm going to flip it around, which is you're bringing a knife to a fucking AR-15 fight, you know, with this liberal value of negotiation and philosophical Socratic elenchus. You know what I mean?
Mookie, you're literally going into it with a knife into an AR-15 fight because, as we keep mentioning, actually the law is not really on the liberal argument side here. I think if you go in fighting on the terms of political blood war, you lose to the Republicans, and not because they're better at it. I know this is a bit of a Bill Maher thing.
I think that's our biggest weakness. You know, there was just a comment about humility. Humility is useless against Republicans of this nature. It's utterly useless. You just brought up the Keebler elf as the political genius of the century. Mitch, you're gonna be humble with Mitch McConnell. This goes to Ali's point about what the fuck is wrong with Democrats. That's wrong with Democrats. We're playing nice. We're being reasonable.
So this is good. This is great. We're not going to do this as a topic. This is what I want to know. I want to go back to that. So as a starting point, and obviously this is open, but. You know, California, you know, Bill Maher wanting solar didn't work out. Then you have, I know we all have our opinions about Elon Musk and, you know, all that Spitz. Yeah. I know your view on it. And Jay, I think I have an idea of your view on it too. But, you know, if you think about it, like this guy, when it comes to the progressive agenda, I mean, this guy's really, really been pursuing with Tesla, with space exploration, the solar city thing he's building. He's really been doing these things. I mean, from an objective level, yes, you can have criticisms about it, but liberals, like, I wonder if a lot of his hostility towards liberals now is just a reaction to that. It's like, you know, I've been pursuing the most liberal progressive agenda that you guys have wanted for decades, and I'm making it a reality. I'm getting shit done. And you guys are just saying that, you know, and I just paid $11 billion in taxes. If I kept it for myself, I could have built all of Solar City, but you want me to give it to the government, and the government's going to spend 80% of it on defense and building, you know, tanks and bombs to go and bomb brown people, whatever. Right. So there's a lot of these sort of the nuances of how this got. These things are not really being discussed. So are we alienating, like, let's say liberals, assuming that we're all sort of liberal people, are we sort of alienating our own people by antagonizing them and then really driving them away into the other place?
Yes.
Because, like, we call out the cancel thing, you know, if you're not, there's this everybody's trying to out-moralize everybody else. And the cancel culture, like, you know, I know that people think it's a conspiracy theory, but it's actually quite real. But I think this is more the way that it manifests. It's not just about wiping someone off the face of Twitter, I guess, but it's more about taking your own people who are doing things and who are probably imperfect allies and turning imperfect allies into enemies. So is that? So anyway, yeah.
Who is that for? Mirage, because
it's for everybody. This is just me venting. But
I mean, who would you rather want to have a beer with? Donald J. Trump or Bernie Sanders?
Bernie. I'm fully on with Bernie.
I'd rather tip a few with Donnie, to be honest.
Hey, listen.
So boring. So extremely boring.
But the point though I'm making, I'm addressing Ali's point.
Yeah.
Liberals are uncool. They're wishy-washy, namby-pamby, woke, cancel culture, self-righteous, opinionated, Berkeley College campus, Austin burrito truck douchebags. And Republicans, okay, are tough. They shoot guns. They chew with their mouth open, and they're cool dudes and gals that you would love to party with. And I know that that's obviously cliched and over the top, but it gets to the heart of what you're getting at, Ali, which is, for one reason or another, liberals are pinko commie weaklings, and the Republicans, just to real quickly round it out. The reason this has happened, I think, to a certain extent, is because there's no unity in Democratic messaging. It's identity politic driven, fragmented individualism with no unified messaging, no unified policy, and no unified point of view. And the crushing blow is the Biden administration, because he's trying to placate all the liberals across the whole spectrum from AOC to Manchin, and he's failed miserably, probably for that reason. The Republicans, and you got to give it to them, most Republicans know Donnie is a fucking maniac, okay? And they even knew, obviously, January 6th was an insurrection and a revolution, but they're, we just don't like to downplay that, because they're unified. They have 5 key talking points. They stick to it. They're loyal, and they fire on all cylinders to get what they want, which is owning the judiciary. They know where power is. They go for it. They're focused, and they're loyal, and they're dedicated. So this illustrates the disparity, just to answer your question. It's deeply emotional. It's diametrically opposite. And this is the number one problem for the Democrats, and they keep shooting themselves in the foot. So if we want the solutions along what Jay's getting at in terms of policy, in terms of judicial mandate and reason, the Democrats need to fix this. And it's getting worse, not better.
Well, to your point,
what do you do about it?
First of all, 2 things. First of all, I just like to point out the irony of the fact that we're talking about how liberals are always shitting on themselves and on each other, and now we're shitting on liberals as well. Like, it's just a bit of a meta moment. But
it's a fact, though.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm just pointing it out. That's all. It's fun.
Yeah. No, it's true, right?
But you're talking about like Joe Biden, and I was dealing with trying to unite the AOC wing all the way to Joe Manchin wing, and trying to come together. you can't even reunify, like, when we're talking about reunification, like, that is just that's pretty much impossible, as we've seen. That's not happening either. So what do we do now? I have a question here. There you go. What happens if Trump or even an illiberal Republican win in 2024? This is from Nick. Okay, so
what do you mean? What do you mean? What happens if they will? That's not a hypothetical, Nick. You're on it.
No, but now the kinds of people who are getting in there, as you said, people who think that January 6th was they don't think it was such a big deal. Stealing the what's the movement called again?
Stop the steal.
Yes.
Another great message. Great. Really good marketing.
Such a high percentage of Republicans are pretty much fundamentally anti democracy now. So and the system is probably even more in place, and the Democrats are even more fragmented than they were in 2010. I mean, it's a downward spiral. So you're saying that it is going to happen. Is there going to be Jay, is there an argument that the Spitz has that yes, let it just crash to the ground, and then maybe it'll be a wake up call, that'll serve as a wake up call?
It'll wake someone up. I mean, it's a global problem. It's a global problem if America falls. I'd be a little less worried about it if I saw another contender in the world. You mentioned Germany already. Boy, oh boy, did they Putin has been waiting to pull that card for a long time, knowing that he had Germany completely wrapped around his finger. I mean, that's an old rivalry, and it hasn't gone away. I'm getting the feeling that Ukraine is a proxy war between Germany and the Soviet Union still. It probably is. I would be a little less worried about it if I saw leadership coming from elsewhere, and you mentioned China, which seems to be the immediate threat. I don't know a way to avoid it either. If that was sort of your question, Ollie, of like what happens to the question is on the immediate level. I don't know how much you've followed the January 6th stuff or paid any attention to it. What's incredibly frightening about Trump, again, for a million reasons, is that whole thing we used to always say at the beginning of like, well, good thing there's adults still in the room because they're going to kind of keep him in order. It really seems by that last week or two, especially, it was like, what's his lawyer's name? Like Sidney, like these are the dumbest people in the country, and there are no adults left. And Trump kind of talk about learning from mistakes. Trump learned from the mistake of, I got to get all the adults away from me. I need children. So I don't know what his next cabinet would look like, but it's like all Rudy's basically. So that is this might be a good time to talk about me moving with my feet, which maybe
a lot of but so what is the let's do this now. Within the last 15 minutes, we've talked about what. So the Spitz has a solution, right? His
I don't think it's a genuine one, but I think it deserves a response. Yeah.
It's a solution. But what I'm saying is Spitz has a proposal that is a solution in the form of a solution where he's saying that, okay, let it disintegrate, that'll and let's see where everything goes. So Jay, I know you're coming to this from a philosophical point of view, but what do you do with the liberals? How do you get, the Republicans are united front, no matter, I mean, this guy Trump can go and he can insult Ted Cruz's wife, he can do whatever he wants, right? And
John
they will
McCain.
still come and just line up behind this guy, right, and support him. They'll go online, they'll tweet against him, they'll do everything, but eventually when it comes down to voting, which is what counts, tweets don't win elections, votes do. It's another lesson for liberals. But there's so when it comes down to it, you know what's going to happen. They're all going to line up alongside him. This is just it seems like an impossibility on the other side. So what is your proposal for a solution?
Well, what's crazy is that I would want to say something like rally around a message like the pro-democracy party or something, but that's an even losing. As Mookie's pointed out, you've got half the country saying like, "What? We don't want that." Right?
Who gives a fuck? No, I don't care.
I mean, I don't want to rehash old wounds, but I really feel like Bernie Sanders was the last chance we had to avoid an absolute catastrophe, and that's going to be true. But we can't go back. Maybe he runs. So here's an optimistic scenario: is that Bernie?
What do you mean? Like in terms of if he had won, or
yes, if he had won. I mean, he was the way to avoid Trump, and Trump is an absolute just fuck you candidate. He's just a middle finger of a person. That was it. Like we were over the tipping point, and now we've kind of unleashed a little of Pandora's box. Bernie Sanders would have absolutely won that election. I have zero doubt. And plenty of Trump voters. He was tapping into that same anger. It was absolutely because here's the thing, to back up and what I would do if I was in the room, to your point of like, how do we get this together? Liberals, small L liberalism really has won. And Mookie's made this point a few times already. It's won. It's won since World War II, and it's won even before that. World War II was almost a proof that it was going to win. It was like, okay, we have no choice because now the pain is just too much. We just, globalism and liberalism has won the day. And there's nothing left to sell people on because it's won. And now we're stuck with, as Mookie's pointed out, we have the Pinker graphs. Things are moving in the right direction globally a little bit. We have that. It's unfortunately not as salient as we need it to be. We can absolutely focus on let's panic and redistribute it till the middle class still exists to a certain degree, and we could just keep them at bay a little more. But the hollowness of the skepticism that conservatism has always had about liberalism is starting to show its face in the cracks. And that's why you're seeing these old wedge issues like abortion and same-sex marriage and all these things come back, and the family, let's get prayer in the classroom again. You're going to hear a lot more of that stuff. And unfortunately, back to the political genius of Mitch McConnell, I don't think power vests in the judiciary automatically, but it does when your legislation doesn't do anything, because then the judiciary branch, as they're doing, can keep writing opinions saying, listen, this is the job of the legislation, and we're just going on what you've written, and you didn't write it, so we're striking this law down, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. Hey, go write a better law, knowing full well that the plan is they're not going to write a damn thing, because they can't even pass the like time zone thing that we're trying to get done still. So that's the situation we're in, to Mookie's point, and it seems really, really bad and hopeless. So my only way to kind of try to, I don't know, advise the liberals to get together somewhat is if Bernie runs again, or find someone who is angry about the right things and champion them and get behind them. I can't even name it.
I just want to push back for a second about Bernie, because my opinion about Bernie is the exact opposite of yours. I think if anyone single-handedly fucked up the Democratic Party, let me hold on for 1 second. And the reason I say that is it triggered the progressive left and empowered them, which is the fuel and energy source of the fragmentation, obsession with identity politics, and woke bullshit that we're talking about. The way to win elections is through the middle. Everyone knows this. Hitler knew it.
Then how come Hillary didn't win? How come Hillary didn't win? How come
she was a shitty candidate, and we self-destructed ourselves because of Bernie fucking Sanders.
Mookie, I dare you to go back and watch The Frontline. I'm in the middle of it now. The two-part episode they did on Clinton from 10 years ago.
I don't know about Hillary. I'm just saying that, and I don't want to get into a Bernie conversation, but answering Ali's point. There's no one more responsible for the shitstorm that the Democrats are dealing with than Mr. Bernie Sanders. And his intentions were great, okay? And his values are great. He wants equality, he wants fairness, he wants a just American system.
Do you think he would have won?
No.
I don't think
that's insane. Okay.
Jay, okay, no, so I don't think he would have won either. I think that there were a lot of
this is crazy.
There were a lot of issues.
He should have been the vice presidential candidate for Hillary. It should be Hillary and Bernie. Then they might have had a chance because the party would have been unified. Okay, then they would have driven it that maybe.
So we're getting into this whole conversation about what would have happened, and obviously that's a very, very difficult question. It's really hard to answer. But there's, to Jay's point, I mean, Hillary was not a very good candidate. That's true, right? But it's not about people voting for Hillary. It's about people realizing that, okay, maybe Bernie isn't the ideal candidate, but like Trump is even worse. Like that was the whole, I think, the issue with the whole Bernie Sanders thing.
No, the Bernie, it was like we love Bernie, so fuck this bitch. And we're not going to vote.
Bernie was very similar. Like the Bernie was rally-based. Okay, you have a lot of Bernie rallies were through the roof. They were all over, he was filling up stadiums. But just like Trump was. It was the same idea. The system is rigged. He
was an outlier candidate. I get it.
All the trade politics, all of the international trade stuff. Anger, channeling the anger. Sort of young.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Right.
Usually, and there, people. So there was crossover.
Swing states. I agree. Swing states. Remember, we talked about a nationalist socialist candidate, which was Trump with Bernie Sanders as vice president. That would have been invincible.
Yeah, that would have won as well. But the ironic thing is, this entire time you're saying Democrats need to get tougher and all this, and then you're telling me run down the middle with a vanilla. I'm the guy now of the three of us who's saying no. Yes, exactly right, Mookie. You need to get serious about this, and you need to start. If you're going to talk about someone who represented a humility of the hollowness and the mistakes of liberalism, it's Bernie Sanders.
I got you.
And it's someone like that. And if you don't project that, because we could talk about sort of like what the woke kids and what's happening on the surface and all this kind of stuff. I'm not interested in that. And yes, Bernie, of course, made mistakes by partnering with Linda Sarsour and these people who were. This was a big problem.
It's the woke shit. He brought the whole woke shit right in.
But don't you understand? That's my whole point of like, if we focus on our disagreements well, I've said this forever. When the woke kids or the Bernie kids or the Occupy kids and the Trumpers realize they have the same anxiety and the same issues, then you're really going to see some big revolutions and some change, and some of it might be good. You're either going to get the Trump one or the Bernie one, and that was it. And the fact that nobody could read those tea leaves.
Who defeated Trump in 2020? I don't remember who defeated Trump in 2020.
Yeah.
Uncle Joe Biden defeated Donald J. Trump.
What question did we just get? What question did we just get? Because of course this was like a band-aid to hopefully breathe for 4 years, let me escape the country, and then it's going to come back.
Yeah.
The Democrats need.
You know, a lot of this was because, I mean, Biden won. He won the primaries because he wasn't Bernie, and he won the election because he wasn't Trump. Because here's the thing: look, the Democrats. This is just a political fact, and this also kind of like Hillary Clinton. You could say she lost because of black people, and it's not because black people. It's because they didn't vote. They didn't come out and vote. There's a lot of minorities. They didn't come out and vote. The problem with Bernie was he wasn't getting any leverage. He wasn't getting any votes from minorities. So it's not like the visible minorities or the people of color wouldn't have come out and voted for him. They probably would have, but he would have lost, I think, to Trump for the same reason Hillary did, that people wouldn't have come out to vote. There would have been a little bit of there would more apathy, especially among, you know, some of these black people and Latinos and things like that. So there was, I think that was what the issue was. That's what the risk was with Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden was just getting a lot of. I mean, this guy, he's done old school. He used to go to Pennsylvania. He used to go into all these churches. You know, he was part of all the black churches.
And the underpinnings of this, from a political strategy point of view, the Republicans have benefited from extremism. Okay, QAnon, Trump, the whole whack job enchilada actually empowers them. Democrats in diametric opposition, the more AOC they get, the more they fuck up elections. So that's just the reality right now. The Democrats need to chill the fuck out, recast the middle,
talk about inflation,
talk about real issues, get the philosophy and the self-righteousness the fuck out of there. And then meanwhile, the Republicans are going to go full fucking conspiracy whack job. And that kind of contest you can maintain. But if the Democrats are going to whack out on the left to the same extent the Republicans do, it's a whole different ball games. They're speaking different languages and they're different rules. And that's a fundamental problem.
They're making it a lot easier for Republicans in many other ways. There's another really big risk, and that's what happened with what happened.
I'm going Nick's little question. He's right. I'm saying Nick.
Oh yeah, Nick is saying they weren't voting for Biden, they were voting against Trump.
100%. Right.
So there's another risk, aside from it, and that's what happened in England. I know Boris Johnson is gone now, but when he won, he won the biggest election
since World War II.
Since the 30s, right?
He did a Southern strategy. The liberals flipped to the conservatives. It's the same thing that Nixon did.
No, but you know how he did it is that he took this is another risk if the liberals go too much towards the AOC route, right? If they go far too left, then that's what Jeremy Corbyn did, right? And then what Boris Johnson. He started taking some of the other sort of center.
Exactly the same.
Started talking about funding the NHS, like their
exactly the same
system. He started talking about all of the things that, essentially like the blue collar workers and everything over there that they used to vote for labor for, right? And so there's a risk that is also strategy. If you have a smart Republican that comes in, fortunately there aren't too many of them, but in case you do have someone who comes in and wants to take on that strategy, the Republicans, they could win really, really easily. There you go. With the agreeing thing, you could see an electoral map. I mean, this might be extreme. I don't know. If the Republicans took that strategy where they actually took some of the Democratic center platform that they had before they went all the way to the left, if they go that route, you could have a reunification in the sense that like Reagan won 49 states out of 50. I don't know if it could.
Then the liberals are really fucked.
Obviously, they were, but that's the thing. But they do climb back. I mean, that was just a few decades ago, and then everything sort of changed. But
Can I make one point about the broader undertones here of what's happening? Because when I say the liberals have won, small L liberalism has won as a sort of global philosophy and the operating system of America for a very long time. I want people to take that seriously, because I'm talking. We mentioned Hillary, her husband Bill. If he was running today, he's a Republican. Like, his economic policy was purely deregulation and pro-corporate, and it paid off in the short run, because it always does when you do that and you win your next election cycle, which is what the Clintons would always do. Internationally, what Trump did with a more isolationist pullout of other countries, Biden just continued. When you're talking sort of from
change,
change for like when you're talking from a macro scale, that's why you could get lost in the weeds of who's who and trying to be a political analyst and stuff. But I think the philosophy and the political philosophy really matters, and it's way more explanatory. I don't know how it informs what you're going to actually do in the end, but small L liberalism has won. And whether you're electing a Republican or whether you're electing a Democrat, you're basically getting the same system, which is why when someone you're getting, they'll tweak the tax code a little bit here and there, but really nobody changed anything about like income inequality.
But we're back to the judiciary, Jay.
Yes.
Which is that's the difference. That's the difference.
So when people are feeling like the system is rigged and you can't vote for either of them to get any real change on that stuff, yes, you will get energized and hyped up about what you keep calling the value stuff, but I think it's the meaning stuff. Because frankly, show me all the pinker graphs you want in the world. I'm skeptical that actually prevents revolutions and prevents people from getting really angry. Things are starting to bubble up, and we are going to fight over. Okay, now we have enough stuff. Sort of. It costs a little bit too much money, but the problem is we're overeating rather than starving. We know all of that stuff, and it's worked. It's delivered its initial promise of the bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we're starting to kill each other over the next layer, which is okay. So what is the good life? What really does this? And now we're really facing the time bomb that we've always been facing since the Enlightenment. Of liberals are supposed to be saying, well, we're agnostic about that, and you get to do what you're going to do, and we're not going to enforce it. And ironically, conservatives who say they're all about individual rights are like, no, that's a problem. We want a society where people are cohesive, and that's either going to be on ethnicity, or it's going to be on culture, or it's going to be on values, or it's going to come from God, whatever it's going to be.
All of the above.
All of the above, which would be like a lightning rod storm. And they will follow a madman to try to get to that promised man, like Trump or like any other madman we can find. And I think the Pence candidacy is dead before it starts now. I'd be surprised if he gets that going, but you're going to see a bit of energy for his sort of religious revival stuff. But now it's almost like as a society, if we fight World War III over this in a global way, it's going to be terrible. But we can't avoid whatever we have to do to cohere to deal with the global problems that we actually have, like climate change, but then also this deep philosophical problem of like, are we just going to reboot small L liberalism, or are we going to admit that there's issues in this, and we need genuine national stories and cohesive stories. I'm a big fan of sports as trying to like get that through a secular way. It could be films, whatever it is.
Well, or an alien invasion. We need an alien invasion, and then we'll all rally around each other, right? You got two eyes, a nose, a mouth, you're in.
China. There we go. Okay, so we're at time, so I'm gonna, I think we'll leave it at that. Just last thing we do, because we like doing predictions here. We always do whatever both of you are here. It's fun. Is Biden gonna run in 2024, or is he gonna somebody else?
No.
Is he going? No, not whether he should. I think we all know the answer to that.
No, he won't. He won't.
Yeah, I don't think he will either. That's my guess right now. And then I should also I should just announce that a lot of this was about this topic of voting with your feet. I'm actually voting with my feet and moving to Mexico in a few months. So I'm out. I put in my cards in the American experiment. The next time we do this, Mookie, you might be the only American still fighting it out.
So I'll just tell you, as
I will be in the Republic of New York.
Let me tell you this as
a Commonwealth. I don't know.
Fresh off the boat immigrant. Well, not really super fresh, but I grew up overseas, and now I still live. I guess not overseas. Overseas only according to George W. Bush. I live in Canada, but it's not really like the U.S. system will still affect you, wherever you are. Everything, all their policies will still affect you, and you still have family here. I've got half of my family is American. They live in the U.S., so it still comes around. It still comes in.
So what about the presidency, Ali? Let's do another prediction. Who's going to be president in 2024?
Yeah, I really am. If I don't think it'll be Kamala Harris if she runs. I don't think it's going to be Biden if he runs. I don't know. I know
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's.
I don't think it's going to be Ron DeSantis either. I think a lot of the Trump victory was because of Trump. I mean, you need the guy like the Teflon candidate. You throw anything at him, it doesn't stick. You need, if you don't have somebody like that, then it's really up for grabs.
Can I say Bernie Sanders? Can I put in my vote for Bernie? Well, it'll be 85 years old.
That's a problem. You guys gotta get rid of this old.
I know,
but old fucking like. Does
he have a son? Does he have someone else?
I'm having heart palpitations just thinking about Bernie fucking Sanders running for president.
Like the thing is, people
curb your enthusiasm. Oh my god.
The thing is, we need somebody who changes, has like when you have these old timers and they're honestly they can't change you need people who can change their minds. You need people who can like sort of think fresh. And this is a problem. Like again, I'm going to quote Elon Musk. He said, "Well, if someone asked him, it's like, would you like to be immortal?" He's like, "No, immortality. I don't think it's a good idea because people don't change their minds, but people do die." Right? Which is, and I think that there's something to that. So I would.
I think Gavin Newsom is really kind of presidential looking. He's a super douche. He's a super douche, and he's got a ton of baggage. But if you think
he's got Mormon hair, he's got the Mitt Romney hair thing.
Yeah. I think just based on his hair and like he's got that like handsome kind of like I'm a president, fuck you kind of look. I think I predict Gavin Newsom, the Democratic nominee, and I don't know. I don't think Trump's gonna make it actually. Because I think there's too much shit, and a lot of his candidates are losing. He's losing some traction. This January 6th shit is having a bigger impact than people thought, right? A bigger impact than people thought. And the Republicans can't wait to get rid of this maniac. He's a useful tool and fool, but Mitch just wants to get this motherfucker out of there. So the Republicans will do anything to get a DeSantis in there.
Yeah, DeSantis.
If they know that he can win, and if it's against the Newsom, he will win. So my prediction is Trump's not going to make it. That's just my prediction. It might
I'll
go
tell you
against
what
the
I think
grain.
would be.
But Trump wouldn't stay quiet
thing
on the sidelines.
So what? Who cares what he says? I just think that
the details matter with the Trump thing, because if it's something like he's not allowed to run because he's a criminal or something like that, or DeSantis is kind of like trying to push him to the side, he will do everything he can because he's so spiteful to sink the guy who he thinks screwed him over.
I think
which is where Bernie can slip in on the other side.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
If Trump told all of his people to vote for Bernie, it would happen. But
my call is Newsom. It'll be Newsom versus DeSantis.
And DeSantis was.
So I think what the smart thing would be, one of the smart things would be, and I don't know, just throwing it out there, is if Mitt Romney runs from the Republican side, I think he'd pull a lot of Democrats, considering the way that the left is.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of Democrats like him. A lot of them like him for his fiscal policies and for the fact that he's not just a complete nut job. Like a lot of the right-wing Republicans. But anyway, the Republicans will line up with him anyway if he wins the nomination.
That's an interesting one. I mean, this is probably not next election, but I've said Nikki Haley will be the first female president, and I'm sticking to it. Although
she embarrassed herself though, and she's such a tool. She was very disappointing in the Trump maelstrom.
No, but she stayed in Trump's orbit enough to not be totally slimed by him.
Trump will have to be gone. She's got the look and she's got the ability, but she just slimed herself so bad. But given Trump, who knows?
Yeah. I don't know what Dolce agreed with, but it's probably what I said.
Dolce said finally something I agree with. I don't know what it was.
What was it?
Probably, we're all wondering who you agreed with, because I think all of us are disagreeing here to some extent, but not really. But anyway, I'm gonna end this here. I think we should apparently Rosie's saying, I'm enjoying this so much. Would you consider making this a recurrent show? And I feel like, well, now we're going to have 3 countries, I guess, Mexico and the U.S. and Canada.
Oh,
so
and the New York Fortress state.
Yeah.
It's like
you're going to have that. So yeah, thanks everybody. If you like Rosie, if you agree with her and you really enjoy this and you like this, go like it, subscribe, and well, if you're on YouTube, just hit the like button, subscribe, and we're gonna do more of this. We're gonna ramp it up again this year. I know it's been a while, but I think it's gonna be fun if you guys are up for it.
Well, thanks for hosting, Ali. Thanks for your great insights, Jay. I had a good time. Thanks for putting up with me.
Always fun.
My loved ones put up with me, all of them.
I think you raise points, whether they're facetious or not. You raise them well, and they genuinely deserve a good response. And I don't know if I was always able to do it. I will encourage people to go find that Fukuyama article. I think it's good. I think he does have the kind of humility. But you're the political analyst. I have no idea how to win these elections.
Yeah. I don't either. And the point about humility is a good one, but it doesn't mean shit anymore at this point. It's sad. It's just true.
I think there's a way to turn humility into like aggression, and I'll figure it out next time.
That's all that works. We're gonna get
right.
you. Yeah.
Okay, everybody, you guys stay on for a second. But everybody else, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll do it again regularly. All right. Bye bye.
Share, comment.
Yeah.
Like.